You forgot your shorts and your dignity.
You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and middle managers? They get screwed by a busted water main and an early dismissal notice. That's how I, Nate Rourke, found myself pulling into my driveway at 5:17 p.m. on a Tuesday instead of my usual 7:30 p.m. crawl through suburban Connecticut traffic. 41 years old, finance manager at Hartwell and Associates, married to Sophie for 15 years, father to 16-year-old Lily, who thinks I'm moderately embarrassing but still loves me. I drive a sensible Honda Civic, wear off-the-rack suits, and until today, I thought my biggest problem was my boss, Ed McAllister, passing me over for promotion again. "Congratulations, Nate," Ed had said that morning, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that comes naturally to men who peaked in high school. "You're consistently mediocre." Thanks, Ed. Really needed that confidence boost. But the water main break that flooded the office building's basement was almost poetic justice. "Everyone out by 5, the building manager announced. Electrical hazard." For once, I didn't have to stay late to prove my dedication to a company that clearly didn't give a damn about mine. I pulled into our driveway, noting Sophie's silver BMW was there alongside a sleek black Porsche I didn't recognize, probably one of her PR firm colleagues. Sophie worked at Carter Communications, running social media campaigns for clients who paid obscene amounts to make their brands seem authentic. The irony wasn't lost on me. I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the front door, already planning my surprise entrance. Maybe I'd actually get to have dinner with my wife for once, instead of reheating whatever she'd left in the fridge with a passive-aggressive note about communication and making an effort. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Sophie was paranoid about security, always going on about property values and neighborhood safety. I stepped inside, calling out, "Honey, I'm home early. The office flooded," and that's when I heard it, a sound that stopped me cold in our marble-floored foyer. My wife's laugh. But not the laugh I'd been hearing for the past few years. The tired, distracted chuckle she gave when I tried to tell her about my day. This was different, throaty, intimate. The kind of laugh she used to give me back when we were dating, when she still found me charming instead of merely convenient. The sound was coming from upstairs, our bedroom. I stood there for a moment, briefcase in hand, processing what my brain already knew but my heart wasn't ready to accept. The expensive car in the driveway, the unlocked door, the laughter that belonged to another version of my wife, one I hadn't seen in years. I should have left, should have backed out quietly, driven to a bar, and pretended I'd never come home early. But Nathan Rourke, mediocre middle manager with a mortgage and a minivan payment, had apparently reached his limit of taking things lying down. I set my briefcase down carefully. Sophie hated when I dropped it on the marble, and started up the stairs. Each step creaked. Our house was built in 1907, and the stairs had a particular symphony of groans and squeaks that usually announced my arrival home. But today, the sounds from our bedroom were apparently loud enough to mask my approach. I reached the top of the stairs and paused outside our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see movement, hear voices. "Julian, we need to be more careful," Sophie was saying. "Nathan's been suspicious lately." Julian Carter, her boss. The silver-haired, Porsche-driving, probably has a boat named after himself, Julian Carter. "Relax, sweetheart," came a man's voice, smooth and confident. "Your husband's about as observant as a goldfish. Besides, he won't be home for hours." Sweetheart. My wife of 15 years was sweetheart to another man. I pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me was straight out of a bad movie. Sophie, my wife, was sitting on our bed in lingerie I'd never seen before. Expensive-looking black lace that definitely hadn't come from Target. Julian Carter, her boss, was standing near our dresser, shirt unbuttoned, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's cologne advertisement. For a moment, nobody moved. Sophie's face went through a fascinating range of expressions: surprise, fear, guilt, and then, surprisingly, annoyance. "Nathan," she said, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You're early." Julian, to his credit, tried to salvage the situation with the kind of smooth confidence that probably worked in boardrooms. "Nathan, good to see you, buddy." Sophie was just showing me the upstairs renovation plans. I looked around our bedroom, which hadn't been renovated since we'd moved in. Same beige walls, same cream carpet, same furniture we'd bought at a clearance sale 10 years ago. "Renovation plans," I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it? That's when Julian made his first mistake. He tried to move past me toward the door, probably figuring he could charm his way out of this like he charmed his way out of everything else. I stepped aside to let him pass. Then I followed him downstairs. Nathan, let me explain, Julian was saying, fumbling with his shirt buttons. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I asked. Because it looks like you were about to have love with my wife in my bed while I was at work, earning money to pay for that bed. Julian reached the front door and turned around, and that's when I saw it. That smug little smile that said he thought he was going to walk away from this without consequences. The same smile Ed McAllister had given me that morning when he'd passed me over for promotion. The smile that said I was forgettable, disposable, mediocre. Something snapped. I walked up to our hall closet and pulled out the mop. It was one of those heavy-duty string mops, the kind Sophie insisted we needed for proper floor maintenance. Nathan, what are you doing? Julian asked, backing toward the door. Cleaning house, I said. I chased him out the front door with that mop, Julian stumbling over our welcome mat in his haste to escape. His shirt was still unbuttoned. His shoes were upstairs, and he was trying to maintain some dignity while fleeing from a middle-aged man with a cleaning implement. Our neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Henderson from next door was pretending to water her already drowned petunias. The Kowalskis across the street had suddenly found urgent reasons to check their mailbox. Perfect. I went back inside, where Sophie was now standing at the top of the stairs, fully dressed and furious. Nathan, have you lost your mind? She screamed. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Embarrassing? I laughed, and it felt good. When was the last time I'd really laughed? Sophie, I haven't even started with embarrassing. I walked into our bedroom and opened her walk-in closet. Designer dresses, expensive shoes, handbags that cost more than my car payment. All of it bought with money from my steady, reliable, mediocre job. I started pulling things off hangers. Nathan, stop it. Those are designer. We're designer, I corrected, hauling an armload of clothes to our bedroom window. I opened the window and started throwing her wardrobe onto the front lawn. A Prada dress landed on our rosebush. A pair of Jimmy Choo shoes bounced off Julian's Porsche windshield. A handbag that probably cost more than most people's rent scattered its contents across our driveway. By now, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the show. Sophie was screaming. I was methodically emptying her closet, and Julian was standing beside his car in his socks, apparently trying to decide whether to leave or attempt some kind of rescue mission. This is insane, Sophie shrieked. I'm calling the police. Good idea, I said, tossing out a cocktail dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your renovation plans. That's when I spotted Julian's shoes and pants in our bedroom. Designer Italian leather shoes and what looked like custom-tailored slacks. Out the window they went. Julian's face when his pants hit the driveway was priceless. The man who'd been so smooth and confident 20 minutes ago was now standing in his boxer shorts and socks in front of half our neighborhood, watching his clothes get distributed across our lawn by a man he'd dismissed as a goldfish. Mrs. Henderson wasn't even pretending to water her plants anymore. She had her phone out, recording everything. In about 10 minutes, this would be all over the neighborhood Facebook group. Sophie had stopped screaming and was now crying, which might have made me feel guilty if I hadn't just heard her calling me suspicious and unobservant to the man she was cheating with. 15 years, I said, not looking at her. 15 years, Sophie, and this is what I get? Nathan, please, she said, her voice smaller now. We can talk about this. Talk? I turned to face her. Like we talked about your unhappiness? Like we talked about our marriage problems? Oh, wait, we never did that. You just decided to talk to Julian instead. I walked downstairs, leaving her in the bedroom. Julian was trying to gather his scattered belongings while maintaining what little dignity a man can have while pantless in suburbia. Julian, I called out from the front door, you forgot something. I held up his wallet, which had been in his pants pocket. He approached cautiously, like I might bite. Nathan, look, I'm sorry about this, he said. It just happened. It just happened, I repeated. How long? What? How long has it been happening? Julian looked uncomfortable, which was fair since he was standing in our driveway in his underwear. Nathan, I don't think 6 months, a year, 2 years? His silence was answer enough. I tossed him his wallet. Get dressed and get out. And Julian? He looked up at me. If I see you near my house again, next time I'm coming out with something bigger than a mop. As Julian drove away in his Porsche, I became aware that I had an audience. Not just Mrs. Henderson and the Kowalskis, but the Patels from 2 houses down, the new couple with the golden retriever, and even old Mr. Murphy, who never left his house except to yell at kids on bikes. They were all staring at me like I'd just performed a magic trick. Sophie appeared in the doorway behind me, fully dressed now in the only outfit that hadn't made it out the window. Jeans and a t-shirt that said "World's Best Mom." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Nathan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." I turned to look at her. Really look at her. When had she stopped being the woman I'd married? When had she started looking at me like I was an obstacle instead of a partner? "No, Sophie," I said. "We really don't." I walked past her into the house, grabbed my briefcase from where I'd set it down a lifetime ago, and headed for my car. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "Anywhere but here." As I backed out of the driveway, I could see our neighbors starting to disperse, probably rushing to their phones to spread the news. By tomorrow morning, everyone in our subdivision would know that Sophie Rourke had been caught cheating with her boss, and that her mediocre husband had finally grown a spine. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. I ended up at Murphy's Pub, a dive bar about 15 minutes from our house, where I was reasonably certain I wouldn't run into anyone from Sophie's social circle. The kind of place that served beer in bottles and didn't have a wine list that required a sommelier to navigate. The bartender was a guy named Danny, who looked like he'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Perfect. What'll it be?" he asked. "Whatever's cheapest and strongest," I said. He poured me a whiskey that probably came from a plastic bottle and minded his own business, which I appreciated. I was halfway through my second drink when my phone started buzzing. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. I ignored them all until I saw one from my daughter, Lily. "Dad, what the heck happened? Mom's crying and the neighbors are talking about designer clothes and trees?" I called her back immediately. "Lily, where are you?" "At Sarah's house, working on our history project." "Dad, seriously, what's going on? Mrs. Henderson posted something on Facebook about you chasing a man with a mop." God bless Mrs. Henderson and her obsession with social media. "Your mother and I are having some problems," I said, which was the understatement of the century. "Problems like divorce problems?" My 16-year-old daughter was sharp, too sharp sometimes. "Maybe, I don't know yet. Are you okay staying at Sarah's tonight?" "Yeah, but Dad, whatever happened, I'm on your side." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't even know what had happened." "I know you, Dad, and I know Mom's been weird lately. Always on her phone, always going out, always complaining about everything. I'm not stupid." No, she definitely wasn't stupid. Unlike her father, who'd apparently been blind for months. After I hung up with Lily, I finally listened to my voicemails. Sophie had left 7 of them, progressing from angry to desperate to angry again. Her final message was a masterpiece of blame shifting. "Nathan, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is completely unacceptable. You've humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood over a misunderstanding. Julian was here on business, and you've turned it into some kind of soap opera. I'm staying at Priya's tonight, and when I come home tomorrow, we're going to have a serious conversation about your behavior." My behavior. Right. The other voicemails were from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably neighbors wanting the gossip straight from the source. I was about to put my phone away when it rang. The caller ID said Ed McAllister, my boss, calling me at 8 o'clock at night. "Hello, Ed. Nathan, what the heck is going on? I just got a call from Julian Carter. He says you attacked him." Attacked him. With a mop. While he was scantily dressed in my bedroom. "Ed, I think there might be some confusion." "Confusion?" "Julian says you went crazy, assaulted him, destroyed his property. He's talking about pressing charges." I took a sip of my whiskey and considered my options. I could try to explain the situation to Ed, who would probably side with Julian Carter regardless of the facts. Julian's company was a client of ours after all, and Ed had never met a client he wouldn't grovel to. Or I could tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. "Ed, Julian Carter was in my bedroom with my wife when I came home from work early today. I chased him out of my house with a mop. If he wants to call that assault, he can explain to the police what he was doing there in the first place," and silence on the other end of the line. "Nathan," Ed said finally, "I think you might be having some kind of breakdown." "You know what, Ed? You might be right. I think I've been breaking down for years and I just didn't realize it. Thanks for the call." I hung up and ordered another whiskey. Danny, the bartender, had apparently been listening because he poured the drink and said, "Rough day?" You could say that. Wife? Wife's boss, actually. Danny nodded like this was a perfectly normal Tuesday night conversation. That's a tough one. You press charges? For what? Adultery isn't illegal. Public humiliation ought to be, though. I laughed, and it felt good. You know what? You're absolutely right. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. I found the number I was looking for and hit call. Rourke and Associates, this is Jennifer. Jennifer Walsh, headhunter extraordinaire. I'd worked with her 5 years ago when I was considering leaving Hartwell and Associates. I'd ultimately decided to stay, figuring loyalty and stability were worth more than a slightly higher salary somewhere else. Stupid loyal Nathan. Jennifer, it's Nathan Rourke. Are you still in the business of finding better jobs for undervalued employees? Nathan, of course. Are you finally ready to leave that dead-end job? More ready than you know. What do you have for someone with my background? Funny you should call. I just got a request from Morrison Financial. They're looking for a senior finance manager, someone with your exact experience. The salary is 30% more than what you're making now, plus bonuses. 30% more. That was real money. When can I interview? How about tomorrow morning, 10 a.m.? Perfect. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Optimism. Maybe getting my life blown up was exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Julian, we need to talk. I stared at the message for a moment and then typed back, no, we really don't. I can make this very difficult for you. That was interesting. Julian Carter, caught red-handed cheating with my wife, was threatening me. Looking forward to it, I replied. Danny was wiping down glasses, pretending not to listen to my phone conversation. You know what the problem is with guys like that? I said. What's that? They think everyone else is as weak as they are. They think if you push hard enough, people will just roll over. And you're not going to roll over? I finished my whiskey and put a 20 on the bar. Danny, I've been rolling over for 20 years. I think I'm done. As I drove home, I realized I felt better than I had in months, maybe years. The worst thing I could imagine had happened. My wife was cheating, my marriage was over, my job was probably in jeopardy, and instead of feeling destroyed, I felt liberated. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Sophie's BMW was gone, and most of her clothes had been cleared from the lawn, probably by Sophie or one of her friends. I made a mental note to check the neighborhood Facebook group later to see what Mrs. Henderson had posted. Inside, the house felt different, quieter, not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful home, but the empty quiet of a place where people had stopped talking to each other long before they'd stopped living together. I went to my office, a small room off the kitchen that Sophie had always complained about, and opened my laptop. Time to update my resume. As I worked, I thought about Julian's threat. I can make this very difficult for you. What did that mean exactly? He could try to get me fired, but I was already planning to leave. He could try to turn Sophie against me, but that ship had sailed. He could spread rumors about me being unstable, but after today's performance, that horse was already out of the barn. What else did Julian Carter have that I might want or need? Nothing, as far as I could tell, which meant his threat was empty, the desperate bluster of a man who'd been caught doing something indefensible. But just to be safe, I decided to do a little research. Julian Carter, age 45, divorced, no children, owner of Carter Communications, which specialized in crisis management and reputation repair for corporate clients. The irony was delicious. The man who made his living cleaning up other people's messes had just created a spectacular mess of his own. I spent an hour reading about his company, his clients, his public appearances and interviews. Julian liked to present himself as a family values guy despite being divorced. He'd given several interviews about the importance of trust and integrity in business relationships. Trust and integrity. Right. By the time I finished my research, it was past midnight. I was exhausted but oddly energized, like I'd been running on empty for years and had finally found a gas station. I was about to close the laptop when I heard a car in the driveway. Sophie's BMW. I stayed in my office and listened to her come into the house. She moved quietly, probably trying not to wake me, assuming I was asleep in our bedroom. After a few minutes, I heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of our bedroom door closing. We were sleeping in the same house, but living in completely different worlds. I spent the night on the couch in my office, and for the first time in months, I slept like a baby. The interview at Morrison Financial went better than I'd expected. The hiring manager, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd built the company from nothing, took one look at my resume and said, "Why are you still working for Ed McAllister? That man couldn't manage a lemonade stand." Apparently, Ed's reputation in the industry wasn't quite as stellar as he liked to believe. "I believe in loyalty," I said. "Loyalty's admirable, but it shouldn't be a self-destructive pact." "What changed your mind?" I considered how much to tell her. "Let's just say I've recently gained some clarity about my situation." Patricia smiled. "Fair enough. The job is yours if you want it. Senior finance manager, 35% salary increase, full benefits, and profit sharing. When can you start?" "How about Monday?" "Perfect. I'll have Jennifer send over the paperwork." I walked out of Morrison Financial feeling like a new man. For the first time in years, someone had looked at my qualifications and seen value instead of mediocrity. My phone rang as I was getting into my car. Sophie. "Nathan, we need to talk. I'm at the house." "I'm not ready to talk yet." "Well, I am. This is ridiculous. You can't just throw a tantrum and disappear." A tantrum. That's what she was calling it. "Sophie, I found you in our bedroom with another man. That's not a tantrum. That's a reasonable response to betrayal." "You don't understand. It's complicated." "It's really not. You're married to me. You were with him. That's about as uncomplicated as it gets. Just come home, Nathan. Please." There was something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Vulnerability, maybe, or fear. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive home gave me time to think about what I wanted to say. Sophie would probably try to minimize what had happened, make it seem like a moment of weakness rather than a deliberate betrayal. She might cry, which had always been her secret tool in arguments. She might blame me for working too much, not paying enough attention to her, not being the husband she needed, all of which might even be partially true. But none of which justified what I'd walked in on yesterday. Sophie was sitting at our kitchen table when I came in, still in her pajamas, looking like she hadn't slept. There was a cup of coffee in front of her, but it looked untouched. "You look terrible," I said. "Thanks, that's exactly what I needed to hear." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. After 15 years of marriage, we could still share the same space, even if we couldn't share the same life anymore. "How long?" I asked. "Nathan, how long, Sophie?" She stared into her coffee cup like it might contain answers. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of coming home late, of distracted conversations and mysterious phone calls and sudden business trips. "Why?" "I don't know. That's not good enough." Sophie looked up at me and I saw something I hadn't expected. Anger. "You want to know why? Because you disappeared, Nathan. You've been disappearing for years. You come home, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed. You haven't really talked to me in I don't know how long. You haven't touched me in months. I felt like I was married to a ghost. So you decided to find someone more substantial. Julian pays attention to me. He listens when I talk. He makes me feel like I matter. And I don't. When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer?" I started to respond, then stopped, because I couldn't remember. "That doesn't justify cheating," I said finally. "No, it doesn't, but it explains it." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Henderson mowing her lawn, probably hoping to catch more neighborhood drama. "What do you want, Sophie?" "I want to fix this. I want to go to counseling. I want to try." "And Julian? It's over. I told him yesterday after you left." "Because you got caught." "Because I realized what I was about to lose." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Sophie had always been a good liar. It was part of what made her effective in PR, but right now she looked genuinely scared. "I got a new job," I said. "What?" "Morrison Financial, senior finance manager, 35% raise." Sophie's eyes widened. "When?" "I start Monday." "You're leaving Hartwell?" "Ed McAllister called me last night. Julian told him I'd assaulted him. Ed suggested I might be having a breakdown." Sophie winced. "Nathan, I'm sorry. I didn't know Julian would..." "Would what? Try to destroy my career to cover up his own mistakes?" "He's not like that, isn't he? Because threatening me seems exactly like something he'd do." Sophie looked confused. "He threatened you?" I showed her the text messages from Julian. She read them, her face growing pale. "I had no idea," she said quietly. "There's a lot you don't know about your boyfriend." He's not my boyfriend. It's over, Nathan, I swear. My phone buzzed. Another text from Julian. Last chance to be reasonable. I showed it to Sophie. Still think he's a good guy? She stared at the message, then at me. What does he want? I have no idea, but I'm about to find out. I typed back, what do you want, Julian? The response came immediately. Meet me at Brennan's bar on Oak Street. 1 hour, come alone. Sophie grabbed my arm. Don't go, this feels wrong. Everything about this situation feels wrong, but I'm tired of running from it. Nathan, please. Let me handle Julian. I know him better than you do. Do you? Because the Julian I met yesterday was a coward who ran from a middle-aged man with a mop. The Julian sending these texts sounds like someone who thinks he has leverage. I stood up and kissed the top of her head, a gesture so automatic I didn't realize I'd done it until it was over. I'll be back in a couple hours. What if you're not? Then you'll know Julian Carter isn't the man you thought he was. Brennan's bar was the kind of place where businessmen went to make deals they didn't want to make in offices. Dark wood, dim lighting, expensive whiskey, and booths that offered privacy for conversations that shouldn't be overheard. Julian was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine again. Perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, confident smile. The smile faltered when he saw me. Nathan, thanks for coming. What do you want, Julian? He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit down. Let's talk like civilized men. Civilized men don't sleep with other people's wives. Fair point. But civilized men also don't chase people out of houses with cleaning equipment. I sat down, mostly because I was curious about what Julian thought he could accomplish with this meeting. You've put me in a difficult position, Julian said. Have I? How's that? My reputation is everything in my business. Trust, integrity, discretion. These are the foundations of what I do. Yesterday's incident threatens all of that. Yesterday's incident was you getting caught cheating with my wife. It was a private matter that you made public. I stared at him. Julian, you were in my house, in my bedroom, with my wife. There's nothing private about that. The neighbors didn't need to see it. The neighbors saw you running barely dressed from my house because you were barely dressed in my house. That's cause and effect. Julian leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell people you made a mistake, that you misunderstood what you saw, that Sophie and I were discussing a business matter and you overreacted. And why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll destroy you. There it was. The threat he'd been building up to. How? I have connections, Nathan. Clients, colleagues, friends in high places. I can make sure you never work in finance again. I can make sure Morrison Financial rescinds their job offer. I can make your life very, very difficult. I leaned back in my seat and studied Julian's face. He was serious. He really thought he could intimidate me into covering up his affair with my wife. Julian, can I ask you something? What? Do you actually believe the things you're saying, or is this just an act? What do you mean? I mean, do you really think you're the victim here? Do you honestly believe that I'm the one who did something wrong? Julian's confident expression flickered. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. I just provided the audience. I'm trying to be reasonable here. No, you're trying to avoid consequences. There's a difference. I stood up. Here's my counteroffer, Julian. Stay away from my wife, stay away from my family, and stay out of my life. Do that, and I won't make it my personal mission to tell everyone in this town exactly what kind of man you really are. You're making a mistake, Nathan. Maybe, but at least it'll be my mistake, not someone else's. As I walked away, I heard Julian call after me. This isn't over. He was probably right about that. But for the first time in years, I was looking forward to finding out what came next. The weekend passed quietly. Sophie and I moved around each other like polite strangers, making coffee and small talk, but avoiding anything that mattered. Lily came home Sunday evening and immediately sensed the tension. Are you guys getting divorced? She asked over dinner. Sophie and I looked at each other across the table. We were figuring things out, Sophie said. That's adult speak for probably, Lily replied. I'm not a kid, you know. I can handle the truth. The truth is complicated, I said. The truth is Mom cheated on you with her boss, and you threw her clothes out the window. Sophie choked on her water. Lily, what? The whole neighborhood knows. Mrs. Henderson posted a video on Facebook. It has like 200 shares already. I pulled out my phone and found Mrs. Henderson's Facebook page. Sure enough, there was a video titled Neighborhood Drama, with a shaky recording of me tossing Sophie's designer clothes out our bedroom window while Julian stood in our driveway in his underwear. The comments were brutal. OMG, Sophie Rourke was cheating. Good for Nathan. About time someone stood up to these cheating wives. Is that Julian Carter from the commercials? What a sleazebag. I always thought Sophie was stuck up. Guess we know why now. 200 shares and climbing. Julian's nightmare was just beginning. Mom, Lily said, I love you, but what you did was really messed up. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I know, honey, I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me, apologize to Dad. I did apologize to Dad. Did you mean it? Sophie looked at me, then back at Lily. Yes, I meant it. Good, because Dad's the best person I know, and if you screwed that up for some guy with a fancy car, you're an idiot. Out of the mouths of babes. Monday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to Morrison Financial for my first day. The office was modern and efficient, nothing like the stuffy corporate atmosphere at Hartwell and Associates. Patricia Morrison introduced me to the team, showed me to my office, an actual office with a window, and handed me my first project. We're auditing the Carter Communications account, she said. They've been a client for 3 years, but something about their billing doesn't add up. I need you to dig into it. I stared at her. Carter Communications? You know them? I know the owner, Julian Carter. Good. That should make the audit easier. I spent the morning reviewing Carter Communications' financial records, looking for discrepancies. What I found was worse than I'd expected. Julian had been overbilling Morrison Financial for services that were never provided. Phantom consulting fees, inflated expense reports, charges for employees who didn't exist. It wasn't technically fraud, the contracts were vague enough to provide legal cover, but it was definitely unethical. And it was exactly the kind of thing that would destroy Julian's reputation if it became public. I was still analyzing the numbers when my phone rang. Sophie. Nathan, Julian's here. At the house? Yes, he says he needs to talk to you. He won't leave. I looked at the financial records spread across my desk. Tell him I'm busy. I tried. He says it's important. Sophie, call the police. He's trespassing. I can't do that. What if it gets out? What if people find out about what? That you were cheating with him? Sophie, people already know. Mrs. Henderson's video has gone viral. Silence on the other end of the line. How viral? She asked quietly. I checked Facebook again. 5,000 shares and counting. Someone posted it on Twitter. It's trending locally. Oh, God. Sophie, call the police. Now. I hung up and called Patricia into my office. I need to tell you something about Julian Carter, I said. An hour later, I was driving home with a folder full of evidence that Julian Carter was a cheating, lying, stealing piece of garbage who'd built his reputation on other people's trust and money. The police were just leaving when I pulled into my driveway. Sophie met me at the front door, looking shaken. What did Julian want? I asked. He wanted you to stop the video from spreading. He said his business was being destroyed. Good. Nathan, he was different, desperate, angry. He said if you didn't help him, he'd make sure everyone knew about our problems. Everyone already knows about our problems. That ship has sailed. He said he'd tell people you were violent toward me, that you'd been hitting me. I stopped walking. What? He said he had photos of bruises, evidence that you'd been hurting me. Sophie, I've never touched you in anger. Not once in 15 years. I know that, but he said he could make it look convincing. I pulled out the folder Patricia had given me. Well, here's something that might change his mind. I showed Sophie the financial records, explained what Julian had been doing to Morrison Financial and probably other clients. He's been stealing? She asked. Systematically, for years. This is enough to destroy his business and possibly send him to prison. Sophie stared at the documents. I slept with a criminal. You slept with a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Turns out he was wrong. My phone buzzed. Text from Julian. Last warning. Stop the video or face the consequences. I showed the message to Sophie. What consequences? He's got nothing left to threaten me with. Nathan, I'm scared. What if he does something crazy? Like what? He's a coward who runs from men with mops. What's he gonna do? As if in answer to my question, we heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Sophie grabbed my arm. What was that? We walked through the house toward the kitchen. The sliding glass door that led to our back patio had been shattered. There was a brick on our kitchen floor with a note tied to it. I picked up the note and read it aloud. This is just the beginning. Call the police, I said. While Sophie called emergency, I walked outside to look at the damage. The brick had come from our own garden border. Julian hadn't even brought his own ammunition. But as I stood there looking at the shattered glass, I realized something had changed. Julian Carter had just escalated this from a personal matter to a criminal one. And that was exactly the mistake I'd been waiting for him to make. The police took our statements, photographed the damage, and added the incident to the trespassing report from earlier. The officer, a young woman named Detective Riley, seemed to understand the situation immediately. Mr. Rourke, has Mr. Carter made any other threats? I showed her the text messages. She read them and shook her head. This looks like harassment and intimidation. Combined with the trespassing and property damage, we have enough to arrest him. Do it, I said. Nathan? Sophie said quietly. Are you sure? If Julian gets arrested, this whole thing becomes even more public. I looked at my wife, who was still worried about protecting the reputation of the man who'd been cheating with her. Sophie, he just threw a brick through our window. He threatened to frame me for domestic violence. He's been stealing from his clients for years. How much more public do you want this to get? Detective Riley looked between us. Mrs. Rourke, are you asking us not to pursue charges? Sophie looked at me, then at the broken glass, then back at Detective Riley. No, she said finally. Arrest him. An hour later, Julian Carter was in custody, charged with criminal trespassing, harassment, intimidation, and destruction of property. His mugshot would be in the local paper tomorrow, right next to an article about his affair with Sophie Rourke and the viral video of him fleeing barely dressed from our house. The man who made his living managing other people's reputations had just destroyed his own in the most spectacular way possible. That evening, Sophie and I sat in our living room while a contractor boarded up the broken door. Lily was upstairs doing homework, occasionally coming down to ask if we were okay. What happens now? Sophie asked. Now Julian goes to court, probably loses his business, and hopefully learns that actions have consequences. I meant with us. I looked at her, and really looked at her. The woman I'd married 15 years ago was still there, underneath the guilt and fear and regret. I don't know, I said honestly. I know I love you. I know I don't want our marriage to end like this, but I also know I can't pretend this didn't happen. I don't want to pretend either. I want to fix it. It's going to take time. I have time. And counseling. Whatever it takes. And you need to understand that Julian Carter was never the problem. He was just a symptom. The real problem was us stopping talking to each other, stopping seeing each other, stopping trying. Sophie nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. I'm sorry, Nathan. I'm so sorry. I reached over and took her hand. It felt strange and familiar at the same time. I'm sorry too, I said. I let our marriage drift and I should have fought for it sooner. What do we do now? Now we start over, and this time we do it right. Outside, I could see Mrs. Henderson watering her plants again, probably hoping for more drama to post on Facebook. But the drama was over. Julian Carter was finished, Sophie and I were going to counseling, and I was starting fresh at a job that actually valued my abilities. For the first time in years, I was optimistic about the future. And if Julian Carter thought he could destroy that with threats and intimidation, he was about to learn just how wrong a man could be. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office at Morrison Financial, reviewing quarterly reports, when Patricia knocked on my door. Have you seen the news? She asked, holding up her tablet. The headline read, Local PR executive sentenced to 2 years for fraud and harassment. Julian Carter's fall from grace had been swift and thorough. After his arrest at our house, the investigation into his business practices had expanded. It turned out Morrison Financial wasn't his only victim. Julian had been running similar schemes with at least 6 other clients, bilking them out of hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. The harassment charges from our incident had been just the beginning. Once the story went public, other victims came forward. Former employees who'd been intimidated into silence, clients who'd been overcharged and threatened when they questioned their bills. Even his ex-wife. who revealed that Julian had hidden assets during their divorce proceedings. 2 years seems light, Patricia said. He'll also have to pay restitution to all his victims, I replied. Plus, his business is finished. No one's going to hire a PR consultant who can't manage his own reputation. Poetic justice. Indeed it was. The viral video of Julian fleeing our house in his underwear had become a local legend. Someone had even set it to music and posted it on YouTube, where it had garnered over 1 million views. Julian Carter had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of thinking you're smarter than everyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Saw the news. How do you feel? I typed back, like justice was served. Sophie and I had been going to counseling for 3 months. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where we barely spoke to each other and sessions where we couldn't stop arguing. But slowly we were rebuilding something that felt more honest than what we'd had before. We'd learned to talk to each other again. Really talk, not just exchange information about schedules and bills and Lily's school activities. We'd learned to listen too, which was harder than it sounded after years of assuming we knew what the other person was going to say. The counselor, Dr. Martinez, had made us do an exercise where we each had to list 3 things we appreciated about the other person every week. It had seemed stupid at first, but after a few weeks, I found myself looking for things to appreciate instead of things to criticize. Sophie had moved back into our bedroom 2 weeks ago. We weren't back to normal, whatever normal had been, but we were building something new. Lily had been the biggest surprise in all of this. Instead of being traumatized by her parents' near divorce, she seemed relieved that we were finally dealing with our problems, instead of pretending they didn't exist. It's like you guys are actually married now, she'd said after our first family dinner in months, where nobody checked their phone or watched TV. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my desk and headed home. The commute from Morrison Financial was shorter than it had been from Hartwell & Associates, and I'd made it a point never to work late unless it was absolutely necessary. One of the things I'd learned in counseling was that my job was important, but it wasn't more important than my family. Ed McAllister had called me twice in the past 3 months, asking if I wanted to come back to Hartwell & Associates. Apparently my replacement wasn't working out, and several clients had specifically requested to work with me. I'd politely declined both times. But Nathan, Ed had said during the second call, I'm prepared to offer you the senior manager position, the one you wanted. Ed, I already have the senior manager position at a company that appreciates me. We appreciate you too. We just didn't realize. You didn't realize I had options. Now I do. It was petty, but it felt good to turn down the job I'd wanted for years. When I got home, Sophie was in the kitchen making dinner. Not reheating takeout or opening a bag of frozen something, but actually cooking. It was one of the small changes we'd made, taking turns preparing real meals and eating them together as a family. How was your day? She asked, and I could tell she actually wanted to know. Julian got sentenced 2 years. Sophie stopped stirring whatever was in the pot. How do you feel about that? It was a question she'd been asking a lot lately. Dr. Martinez had taught us to check in with each other's emotional state instead of assuming we knew how the other person felt. Satisfied, I said. Not happy exactly, but satisfied. He hurt people, and now he's facing consequences. I feel terrible about it, Sophie said quietly. Why? Because if I hadn't been involved with him, none of this would have happened. You wouldn't have caught us. There wouldn't have been a video. He wouldn't have gotten desperate and started making threats. I walked over and put my arms around her from behind, something I hadn't done in years before the counseling started. Sophie, Julian Carter was stealing from his clients long before you met him. He was intimidating people and hiding assets and lying to everyone he did business with. What happened between you two just brought it to light. But if you hadn't cheated, we'd still be living like roommates. I'd still be working for Ed McAllister, getting passed over for promotions, and Julian would still be stealing from people. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sophie leaned back against me. Do you really believe that? I believe we're in a better place now than we were 6 months ago. Both of us. Even though I cheated on you, even though you cheated on me, even though I neglected you, even though we both let our marriage drift for years without fighting for it. Lily came downstairs, took one look at us, and rolled her eyes. Are you guys going to be all mushy now? Because that's almost as embarrassing as the fighting. We're going to try to find a middle ground, Sophie said. Good, because Mrs. Henderson keeps asking me if you're getting divorced, and I'm tired of telling her it's complicated. What do you tell her now? I asked. I tell her you're working it out, and it's none of her business. That's my girl. Over dinner, Lily told us about her day at school, where she was apparently something of a celebrity due to the viral video of her father chasing a man with a mop. Tommy Martinez said his mom thinks you're a hero, she said. She said more wives should be afraid their husbands will embarrass their boyfriends. I'm not sure that's the message we want to send, Sophie said. I don't know, I replied. Maybe a little fear of consequences wouldn't hurt. After dinner, Sophie and I cleaned up together, while Lily did homework upstairs. It was a mundane domestic scene, but it felt more intimate than anything we'd shared in years. Nathan, Sophie said as we finished loading the dishwasher, I want you to know that I understand what I almost threw away. What's that? This, us, life we built together. I got so focused on what was missing that I forgot about everything we had. What was missing? Excitement, I guess. Passion, the feeling that I mattered to someone. You matter to me. I know that now, but for a while I didn't feel it. And Julian made you feel it? Sophie was quiet for a moment. Julian made me feel desired. But that's not the same thing as mattering. No, it's not. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out. I'm sorry it took me so long to show you that you mattered. We stood there in our kitchen, two middle-aged people who'd nearly destroyed their marriage and were now trying to rebuild it into something stronger. Do you think we're going to make it? Sophie asked. I think we're going to try harder than we've ever tried before. Is that enough? It has to be. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought about Julian Carter sitting in a prison cell, probably wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful businessman with a reputation for integrity and discretion. Now he was a convicted felon whose mugshot had become a meme. The man who'd threatened to destroy my life had destroyed his own instead. There was a lesson in that, but I wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was about the dangers of underestimating people. Maybe it was about the importance of consequences. Maybe it was just about karma. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just about the fact that when you build your life on lies and manipulation and the assumption that other people are weaker than you are, eventually reality catches up with you. Julian Carter had thought he could intimidate me into covering up his affair with my wife. He'd thought he could threaten his way out of consequences. He'd thought he was smarter than everyone else. He'd been wrong about all of it. And now he had 2 years in prison to think about just how wrong he'd been. I climbed into bed next to Sophie, who was reading a book about communication in marriage. We were both trying, in our own ways, to make sure we never ended up where we'd been 6 months ago. Good night, Nathan, she said, reaching over to turn off the light. Good night, Sophie. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how much had changed since that Tuesday afternoon when I'd come home early from work. I'd lost a job I'd hated and gained one I loved. I'd nearly lost a marriage and found a better one. I'd discovered that the wife I thought I knew had depths I'd never explored, and that the man I thought I was had strengths I'd never tested. Julian Carter had tried to destroy my life, and instead he'd given me a better one. I should probably send him a thank you card, but somehow I didn't think he'd appreciate the gesture. 1 year later, the neighborhood 4th of July barbecue was in full swing when Mrs. Henderson approached me with her phone out, obviously hoping for another viral moment. Nathan, she said, I heard Julian Carter got out of prison early. Good behavior. Aren't you worried he might come back? I looked around at the scene. Sophie laughing with the neighbors she'd been too embarrassed to face a year ago. Lily playing volleyball with kids who'd made her famous at school. Me manning the grill like a suburban dad in a commercial. No, Mrs. Henderson, I said. I'm not worried. But what if he wants revenge? I flipped a burger and considered the question. Julian Carter had lost everything. His business, his reputation, his freedom, his dignity. If he wanted revenge, I couldn't blame him. But revenge for what? For getting caught, for facing consequences, for discovering that the world didn't revolve around his needs and desires? You know what, Mrs. Henderson, I said. If Julian Carter wants to come back and try to destroy my life again, he's welcome to try. But he should know that I'm not the same man I was a year ago. What do you mean? I gestured at my family, my neighbors, my life. A year ago, I was afraid of losing what I had. Now I know I can rebuild anything that gets torn down. That makes me a lot less afraid of men like Julian Carter. Mrs. Henderson looked disappointed that I wasn't providing more drama for her social media feed. Besides, I added, I still have that mop. She walked away, probably to find someone else to interview about neighborhood gossip. Sophie came over and handed me a beer. What did Mrs. Henderson want? To know if I was worried about Julian getting out of prison? Are you? Are you? Sophie thought about it. No, he's not our problem anymore. No, he's not. We stood there together, watching our daughter play volleyball, listening to our neighbors laugh and argue and live their lives. It was ordinary and suburban and exactly the kind of life I'd once thought was boring. Now I knew better. Boring was underrated. Boring was safe. Boring was the foundation that lets you build something meaningful. Nathan, Sophie said, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come home early that day? Every day. What do you think? I think we would have kept drifting apart until one day we woke up and realized we were strangers. I think Julian would have kept stealing from people until someone else caught him. I think we'd all be living smaller, sadder lives. So you're glad it happened. I'm glad we survived it. I'm glad we learned from it. I'm glad we're here. Sophie smiled and kissed my cheek. Me too. As the sun set over our suburban neighborhood, I realized that Julian Carter had given me the greatest gift of my life. He'd forced me to fight for what mattered, and I'd won.